You on?
Are we good? Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Martin, and I'm the chair of Discipleship Ministries. And on behalf of the Discipleship Ministries team, I just want to welcome you to today's session. And thank you for joining us, whether you're in the room or on Zoom. And also thank this amazing team with the Race Reconciliation and Social Justice Ministry for all of the great speakers they brought to us this summer. I mean, it's just been one after another, and today is no exception. So we're excited to have you here for this session of, I had to write it down, it's a lot of words, Love, Learn, Unite, a Christian Perspective on Race. So thanks for coming. I'd like to turn it over to the Race Reconciliation and Social Justice team. Cameron, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to remind everybody online and in the room that this session is being recorded. So if you'd like to catch it later, it will be online. You can access it through member resources on the church website. The password is Holden. This morning's scripture, got 1 Peter 4, verses 8 through 10. Above all, love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in various forms. Let us pray. Dear God, thank you for this day. Thank you for this space in which we come together each week to learn how to be better neighbors. God, we ask that you help us remember what hospitality truly looks like and how we might best help our family in Christ. May your Spirit guide us to have open minds and hearts. In your name we pray. Amen.
For the third time, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. There we go. Just because it's happened 3 times doesn't mean I'm not going to hold you to it. So last January of 2019, I had the opportunity to be introduced to a very special person who just happens to be our guest speaker today. I was working with a group of guys that were leading 100 folks through February 1 in the history of Greensboro. And our own Laura Lorenz, who was with Action Greensboro, suggested that I meet with Natalie Miller at the Magnolia House. And I said, she sounds great. What's the Magnolia House? Fast forward to here we are today. And I can't imagine living without knowing what a beautiful piece of history we have in our community. The word hospitality means more to me now than it ever meant before. And that's coming from somebody who grew up in the hospitality industry. And that is because of my friendship with Natalie and all of the seeds that she's planted, not only in my heart, but in the heart of this community with what they're doing. So that being said, it is an absolute honor to unleash Natalie Pass-Miller upon you today. So Natalie, thank you very much.
Morning, y'all. You ready?
We're ready.
Wonderful. So let me do the COVID introduction. Good morning. I'm vaccinated. This is like, you know, the baby shirts that say my name is No. Like you need one of those shirts, right? Okay. So I am Natalie Pass-Miller. My husband in the back there is Devin Miller. And we are the owners of the Historic Magnolia House in Greensboro. And so if you are not familiar with where that's located, because oftentimes folks will get us confused with the Magnolia Manor. We are on Garl Street, sitting on the same street as Bennett College, right at downtown. And so thank you guys so much for having us. We are truly honored to be able to sit and talk a little bit about this hidden gem, and then a much larger hidden gem, which is the travel of the African-American person historically. So if we want to go ahead and kick off the presentation, and we'll take it from there. I'm going to talk about a couple of different things this morning. So we will talk about the history of what I call the Negro Traveler and the Green Book. We will also talk about the Historic Magnolia House and what we're doing with that in terms of preservation of these African American sites. And so this is a picture of us. We sit literally on the downtown Greenway, which has been a phenomenal partnership and a great way to build the bridges that we are already starting to build as a historic site. And if we want to go to the next slide. There you go. All right, so a little bit about who we are. So I don't know if you guys have heard about the Green Book. Essentially, for those who have not, it is the Negro Traveler's Guide. And essentially, it was the yellow pages for African Americans whenever they would travel during the Jim Crow. So if you needed to figure out where to stop and eat, if you needed to figure out safe places to get gas, or even stop and get a haircut or car maintenance, it listed all of these elements in that book. And so the Historic Magnolia House, we were listed in 6 editions of the Green Book. And we were, if you look in there, and you'll see very shortly coming up, you'll notice that we're starred in each of those editions, which means that we were the highly recommended place to stay during the Jim Crow era in Greensboro. And between Atlanta, Georgia, and Richmond, Virginia, we were the only place of prominence to stay, which means that we were very honored to be able to host several different guests that a lot of you have probably boogie woogied or shook your bum to, if you will. But we also are partners with the National Trust for Historic Places, and we are listed as a distinctive destination with them. So quite a bit of work over the last couple of years have gone into the expansion of our national footprint and the larger conversation around all of us Green Book sites, the community, and what do we do with that. We are listed on the National Register of Historic Places by the Department of Interiors. And I actually want to pause here for a minute because one of the things that have really fueled our foundation, which is our nonprofit that works with the preservation and the programming and education. So I'll throw some data behind kind of what we do and why we do it. So when we talk about the Department of Interiors, there's around a little over 900,000 listings, right? That's what I deem the godfather of registered or certified historic sites. If you're on that list, you are truly certified as a historic site. Over those 900,000 listings, there are maybe 3 or 4% are focused on African American historic sites. So there is a lot of work to be done in terms of recognition and designation and honoring these sites for their contribution in the African American history. And so that is a big part of what we do and focus on in terms of these Green Book sites, starting with Magnolia House. And so with that, what's really interesting, and I'll tell you, I think Devin and I have probably the most humbling position in the work that we do, because I mean, every month we're learning something new. Every month the house has a story to tell us, and you know, we are on the journey of just figuring out how to take those stories and just share them and immerse them back in the communities and share them with everyone else. And so it really is, it's a very fun project. It's a hard project, but it's so meaningful in many different ways. And so Magnolia House, as an example, they're on that listing. So they're one of those over 900,000, but they're not recognized as African American. In fact, they're recognized as the William B. the Butts House is what you would see. And William B. the Butts, he rented the home. He didn't even buy the home, build the home. So there's a lot of work to be done in that space and a lot of great work that we'll be doing there. So when we think about Green Book sites in the state of North Carolina, and I don't sit still very well, so I'm struggling. I pace quite a bit. But in terms of North Carolina, so you're looking at about, I want to say it's like 360-ish documented Green Book sites in the state of North Carolina historically. In our partnership with the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, in a project that they did called the Oasis Spaces, which focused on North Carolina Green Book sites. From that research, I think we're sitting at a little bit over 60 that still have a brick in the same place, or a slab of concrete, or some structure of some kind. Magnolia House is one of maybe 4 that is still open and operating and in the same structure and layout of its Green Book Hotel. So, and that's in the entire state of North Carolina. So there's a lot of information, a lot of healthy information I provided to you all, which I'm sure that I hope that you guys can understand why Devin and I are this is a labor of love for us, and it's a lot of great work that's going on. So when we talk about the Magnolia House Foundation, we talked a little bit about the historic recognition and designation, site marker designation work that we do. We also work to, basically what we do is we wrap our hands around these different structures, right? So the whole goal is to replicate not only the operation, but also the actual structure and layout of its historic site. So, for example, today, when you look at Magnolia, or you go into Magnolia, on the front end, you'll see, oh, okay, so they do private events and gatherings, and they do corporate meetings. And we have the hotel that we're opening up this fall. We do our brunches and dining service. So that's what you guys see when you look at us. But what you don't see is the corporate meetings we're recreating when the NAACP would have their national conferences and co-host with us. So when Charlotte Hawkins Brown would have, you know, her women's group meetings, or her goddaughter's gala. So when we say we replicate history, we truly do replicate history, and we're very intentional about the way that the community engages with the house. So, and I did mention we'll be open in, this fall, we're opening the hotel, and that is huge. Once we open the hotel, we will have pretty much a 95% replica of the 1949 motel. And when you go in to experience it, you'll be walking in as James Baldwin did, and Louis Armstrong when he stayed with us for 3 weeks at a time. So in terms of enhancing tourism and developing youth and creating jobs, all of this stems from the operations that we put in place. We also are going to be pulling together, putting up, building an African American History Museum on premise that is really focused on the hidden narratives, stories, gems, and individuals of North Carolina. And then we also will, because of who we are and who have stayed with us, we have an arts and music education programming that's put in place in honor of the guest and the history of the home. So quick story, and I have a lot of those. So I'll look to somebody to raise their hand or stand up and there's something. But quick story for you all. The Gist family, they were the owners of the hotel. They bought it in 1949, and they turned it immediately into the Green Book Hotel. The Gist family, they had 3 children, 3 amazing and well-educated children. One of the sons, his name was Buddy Gist. And you guys actually will be in for a treat because he's going to talk to you a little bit later in the as we get down the line here. But Buddy Gist was really close friends with Miles Davis, and they were so close. They invested in each other's companies. I think Buddy had a really good, successful coffee company here, and they trekked back and forth between here and Harlem for Miles' music career. And so Miles, because of that relationship, Miles Davis, he gave Buddy one of his trumpets from his signature album. It was the Kind of Blue album. And before Buddy passed away, he donated that trumpet to UNCG's music school. So if you go over to UNCG, down on the ground floor, you'll see an enclosed Miles Davis trumpet. And that's why they call themselves the Miles Davis Jazz Program. And so that was when I came in, we moved here. So we moved here, it's almost 4 years, I think now. But when we did move and start working on the project with Dad, that was one of the first things that I learned. And I don't know about y'all, but I had to kind of sit on my hiney a little bit and understand that whole story and figure out what to do with that. But out of that came our music education program. And so prior to COVID, for about a year and a half, at our Sunday brunches, you would see the UNCG Miles Davis jazz students playing. They would go through rotation. We were a part of their curriculum. We even opened up a supper time jazz where we had the A&T students playing and high school students. And the best treat, if you did stalk us on Facebook, you'll see a 10-year-old on the trumpet that blew everybody away. It was amazing. It was amazing. So, but yeah, that's an example of the different music and arts programming that we have going on. And so if we go to the next slide. So we talked a little bit about our service lines. Let me talk to you guys kind of a little bit more about the history of how we got to where we are today. Very quickly, so I mentioned the Gist family. They purchased a home. I think they were originally from South Carolina. They purchased a home in 1949. The home was built in 1889. And it was 1995. So myself, I grew up in the same neighborhood as the Magnolia House. My dad also grew up in the same neighborhood as the Magnolia House. And so in 1949, the 50s and the 60s, essentially what you would see, you'd see these neighborhood kids like running up and down the street, Dad being one of them, right? So where's the fancy car? Who's getting out of the fancy car? Who's on the porch? I don't even think they're famous, but I want their autograph, right? So that was kind of the childhood buzz in the neighborhood. And so when the Gist family, when the hotels decided to desegregate, that was really when you started seeing, I don't know that demise is really the best word, but that's where you started seeing the Green Book sites really starting to fail a little bit because everybody was now able to stay at all the hotels. And that was kind of the demise of the Magnolia House when the hotels decided to desegregate. And so after that, they tried to keep it going as a boarding house, but couldn't keep that going, bless their hearts. And so it fell into disrepair. It became like any other, any other home that's just sitting there with squatters and all kinds of unfortunate stories. And so I don't even think Mama Gist is what I call her. I don't think she got the for sale sign like all the way in the ground before here comes my dad in 95. And he just, he grabs it and immediately purchased a home with the intent to save and restore. And so today, if you were to, when you come and visit us, you're sitting in about 85, well, a little more than that now because we're doing repairs. We're probably sitting at about 90, 87, 90% completely restored. And all of that, 85% of that is all from Dad's work and the visionary that he was. And so about 4 years ago, I actually was coming home to plan our oldest daughter, who was graduating from nursing school in Tennessee. We were talking about celebrating her, and we wanted to do it at Magnolia House. And I will say that, after college, I was gone, right? You just have on tunnel vision. You're focused on the kids, getting married, right? Your professional career. I had no clue about the history of the Magnolia House, not my family heritage, none of that going into this. And, so Dad, we were talking, and Dad was tired, and he's working at Duke. So he's on the road every single day going back and forth and just not able to give it the time that it really, really needs. And, he was like, Natalie, I'm not sure what we're going to do. I've been at this since 95. Here it is, 2017, 18. And I'm just not sure. And so, that's where Devin and I were like, well, give us a couple of years. Let's take a swag at it and see what we can do. And then if we need to sit down and have that conversation again, we will. And so that's what kicked that off. Here we are 3 or 4 years later, how many every years later, and I can promise you we're not having that conversation again. I can promise you that. But we moved here from Atlanta in 18, and we moved in September. And so in September, in October, November is when the Green Book movie came out. Have you guys seen it? How many have you? Raise your hand. Okay, so the Green Book movie came out. So that's the first time I really understood any of the history of the house. And if nothing has ever put me on my hiney, that information and the history of that house absolutely did. And in terms of, oh my gosh, wait a minute, Devin, what do we really have? Wait a minute, what do we do with this? So, and that's where the foundation came out of this and all the work that we're doing. And so some of the service lines that we offer, we did mention before, that we're working on the museum, the education programming, the dining services, the corporate functions, and the hotel. Well, another important component, the house that is relates to the African-American traveler is the shoebox lunch. How many of you are familiar with the shoebox lunch? So let me see if I can create a visual for you. So let's take Carter G. Woodson. So Carter G. Woodson was a guest of ours. So let's say he's getting on the road to travel here, and he's going to be coming into town to speak at A&T. Before he leaves, the matriarch of the house, whether it's a lady friend, a wife, what have you, would take a piece of fried chicken or a hard-boiled egg, an apple or something, and at the time, put it in a shoebox. So he'd take that shoebox, get in the car, they go over to the Esso gas station, which today is Exxon. They pay about $1.25, $1.50, and purchase a Green Book. They sit in that car and they map out their travel route and determine where they were going to stop before they got on the road. In mapping that out, if there was not a Green Book stop on the way, nowhere to eat, nothing like that, then they were still okay because they had that shoebox. And that is what saved them from having to stop at a potential unsafe place and being humiliated or facing violence. And so they'd make their way here to Greensboro. You'd see the kids wondering who they were coming, getting out of the car, and they check in and they have their experience. So that's the history of the shoebox meal. And during COVID, we launched the Magnolia House Shoebox Lunch and Learn program. And essentially that's our way of providing Black history education in a box. And we add food in there, similar to how you would experience if you were traveling as an African American. So we offer that service line as well. Really quick, so one of the unique things about us is we take a holistic approach to preservation. What does that mean? You know, in the days of preservation, historic preservation, you just kind of think about, you know, fighting the good fight of saving the structure, right? Just doing whatever we need so it doesn't get demolished or torn down, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there are some other elements that are equally as important if you're looking to truly preserve a site. And so here are some of our focus areas when we talk about holistic preservation. So of course, the structural preservation we talked about, the actual work that we're doing and completing that this year. The museum development and operations. So that is telling the bigger story or creating some platform where you can tell the larger story and you can celebrate all the stories that kind of fall within, you know, the African American history and these sites. And then of course, the economic development arm. So one of the really fascinating things that happens when we're going to preserve these sites is you essentially are reuniting these historic sites with their communities, right? And so when you think about that, you're thinking about, from an operations standpoint, you're creating jobs. From an operations standpoint, you're bridging communities because now we have people from all over Greensboro, all over the nation actually, you know, coming to this site. And those sites, I can guarantee you all of them, 9 out of 10, although 9 out of 10, maybe 9.5 out of 10 of them sit in underserved and low income communities. So just from the preservation work that you do, you're already developing that community. And so take that a little bit further and, well, now that we have all of this visibility, we have all this traffic, we have tourists coming in, well, what do we need to do in the community in which it sits to prepare that community for what's to come? What does that look like? Well, that looks like, you know, the residents in those low-income communities, preparing them for the workforce. They very well may have jobs as a result of what you're doing. You know, whether it's through financial literacy, whether it's through developing the youth in that community, and giving them access to things they ordinarily wouldn't have that's sitting right in their backyard. So that's the economic development arm of what we do. And then community partnerships. This is a really big requirement in terms of the preservation work. We've developed some pretty solid relationships, and I think we'll see a little bit of that later. But then the performing arts program. So if we want to go into the next slide. Here's an example of some of the partnerships that we've created. These are organically grown or intentionally grown. But what this has allowed us to do is it truly allows us to go through and truly capture and recreate the operation and the function of the home. And I'll tell you that for me, when we talk about Magnolia House, as I stand still, I'm struggling so hard. When we talk about Magnolia House, just from my perspective, one of the favorite elements about it is it's the history that it was, absolutely, but it was fascinating to me that the guests, when they would come, they were just able to be. They were able, in the demands of all that was going on and the segregation and all of that, this truly was a safe place for them to be. That translated into, what Corey was talking about earlier, James Brown playing outside of the neighborhood kids. How do I know that? One of the kids came to brunch and we talked about it. That translated into when Louis was staying here for 3 weeks at a time and he'd just sit in the ballroom and clean his trumpet while Mama Gist was, making him biscuits. Like it translated into them just being able to safely be themselves. And as a result of that, the greatest albums, all of the great music, all of the books and the storytelling and all of that came out of that. So that's probably my favorite part about, what the Historic Magnolia House did and these other Green Book sites. But these are a few of our partnerships that we have within the community. And that has expanded quite a bit this year. And if we want to go on to the next slide, thank you. Thank you so much. So this slide here, this just kind of highlights the 6 editions that we're listed in. Right now, when you come to visit us, what you would see is we tell all of our stories on our walls. That's by our museum project. It's called If the Walls Could Talk. And we have a Green Book wall, and we also have a wall where we celebrate our guests. And then we have my family heritage wall. And what's been really exciting is we've launched our youth STEM program with our historic preservation virtual reality technology, which is also added to the museum. So I think that last week you guys talked a little bit about redlining. Right on time. Where's the young lady? Becky. There we go. I love it. So we talked a little bit about redlining. When you think about the African American traveler, there are a couple things in addition to the shoebox that was really key. And what was interesting is how they took redlining and from an urban planning perspective, what that looked like. So for example, I think it's Chicago. I don't want to confirm that. I have to go back and look. But as an example, for those that would build bridges, back during the age of Jim Crow, all African Americans at the time, we thought they would take buses everywhere they went, right? They weren't aware that we could afford cars and buy cars. And so when they would build bridges, there's one particularly in Chicago, they build it low so that a bus can't get through, so that Blacks can't come on that side of town. And it's little nuances like that, when we think about the transportation world, it's much bigger than just Blacks at the back of the bus or whites only here. There was a lot of intention and thought behind bridges, really? Like bridges? But with that, and African Americans being able to purchase cars, we were, they were really smart about how they were able to maneuver and work through the segregation era. One thing you'd never catch an African American purchasing the hottest, newest car like we see people do today. They would intentionally purchase older cars so that they don't stand out when they're driving them to get pulled over by the police. They also would carry with them what I like to call the Negro Traveler's Toolkit. We have an exhibit about it today. And in that toolkit were a few things. Of course, it was the Green Book. Of course, it was a shoebox meal, a gas can, the chauffeur's hat. So the chauffeur's hat was a huge in terms of saving African Americans from humiliation and violence. Just one little chauffeur's hat. And so essentially what would happen is if they were not carrying that hat and they didn't have it hung up in the back seat of their car, they would automatically get pulled over by the police, and they would suspect them of having stolen the car or done something, because at the time we couldn't afford cars. And so having that chauffeur hat and being encountered by a police officer, they were able to portray them being a driver of whomever was in the car or whomever owned the car. So of that entire toolkit, the chauffeur hat and the shoebox meal, well, of course, the gas can, but they're all really key in terms of how they played a role in being able to get those to go on those journeys. So just a little glimpse into some of the fancy cars and some of the guests. And again, Buddy, he's going to talk a little bit about this. But these are some of the guests that have stayed with us. Our wall with all of the guests that we have continues to be a living and breathing wall. I think our most recent person we've learned about is Little Willie John and Sam Cook. He's not up on the wall as of yet. He's on here. All right, so before we hear from Buddy, I wanted to take a minute. I think I have talked about a lot of different things. What questions do you all have, or anything you guys want to mention?
I just have it struck me when you talk about the Miles Davis School of Jazz at UNCG. That really strikes me that would come from the Magnolia House. And there is a local boy who is in the Miles Davis School of Jazz who was asked to be on, did not audition for, but asked to be on America's Got Talent. And he is now competing, and he was asked to be on it. So it's just for me, it's a wonderful connection. And I appreciate you sharing that with us, because now I know where that School of Music came from. It's just fascinating.
Yeah.
And we have a kid that could just go, who knows where now. I mean, he's extremely talented. He plays at the O'Henry Hotel, but great connection. And it makes me more connected to history. But thank you for sharing that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. For the virtual folks, did you guys hear that?
No.
So I think that so she was basically talking about. Actually, I'll let you. Where's the mic? Can we do the mic?
Try it.
Well, she shared.
You want to join me up here? Okay, so that's okay. That's okay. So basically, she was just commenting on how surprised she was to learn about the connection between the UNCG, that Miles Davis Jazz Trumpet and Program, and the Magnolia House. And I guess there was a young kid in particular, I don't remember his name, but I know who you're talking about, who's doing very, very well as a result of that program. And I will tack on, did I catch that right for the most part? Am I missing anything you want me to say?
Well, you can see him on America's Got Talent.
You can see him on America's Got Talent. And one thing I'll say too is that that's a great story. One of the things I loved about James Brown, so when James Brown would come through, sometimes he'd bring his band, but sometimes he wouldn't intentionally. And there was a really smooth name, I love it. There was a Cadillac Jack, right? And so Cadillac Jack would help him source his artists, his band, when he comes into town from local talent. So I thought that was just the grooviest story, well, one of the grooviest stories. Any other questions? I think the gentleman behind you had his arm up earlier, and then I'll come to you.
I just want to make a
A&T from 1952 to 56. And during that time, we had Count Basie, who came in to play for the ROTC ball, and he stayed at Magnolia House. And also, I recall there were not too many restaurants to go to. Most of them was on Market Street. And some of the students, when they got enough money, we would go to the Magnolia House for lunch and have dinner there and take a vinegar there. And also, one of the things about the shoebox, remember, they also used that to take on, when they left us at desk and they were riding the train, they would take that on the train with them because there was no place to eat on the train and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the shoebox thing was really important.
Indeed, agreed. And so for the folks on Zoom, he was talking about some of the memories. Count Bessie would stay at Magnolia House when they would come to A&T to visit, and then also talked about how African American travelers would take the shoebox on the train whenever they were traveling as well, and it was a very important piece. Yeah, well, it was, I think, and one of the things I learned about the Negro traveler and the train is that where they sat, they would actually travel with them. I can go on. How are you?
Video's 8 minutes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. When they were traveling, they would always pack a pair of clothes that was worn down and old and raggedy. And when they got on the train, they would change into those clothes because they could only sit in the car that was already dirty with oil and soot and all kinds of things. And so, yeah, it's little things like that too that are really interesting.
Yeah, when we got to Baltimore, Maryland, and the train, and one either way.
Yeah, so for the Zoomers on the call, he was talking about when you get to Baltimore, Maryland, you could change. Yes, sir.
Who published the Green Book?
Victor Green. Oh man, that's a story. So that actually is going to be an exhibit for our Black House History Month exhibit this year, well, 2022. That is an amazing story, y'all. If I had another 45 minutes, we could just sit here and kick it and I would just talk to you about it. I mean, he published it, so to answer your question. And it's really an amazing story because, yes, it's a story of resilience and entrepreneurship, and a Black entrepreneur at that doing so well. But it's also a story of how he had the backing of Esso, or now Exxon, to help him put things in place for this operation to kick off and to expand and to become nationwide as quickly as it did and as far-reaching as it did. And then, of course, it's extremely important. There's a narrative there that I can't wait to dig into. Ladies, when Victor Green got sick and his wife had to take over the operation, and she was critical in helping that expansion. So there's a lot of really powerful elements that go into the story of Victor Green and the operation behind the Green Book that I can talk about forever. And the question was, who started the Green Book? Sorry. Any other questions? All right, so I am we're gonna go ahead and start, and Buddy Gist, again, who is the son. Oh, one of the other tidbits, I'll share this and I'll leave it alone. I'll back down and so we can start the video. When we talk about the Gist kids, so it was Herman Jr. He did political work out of Raleigh. But then they had one girl, Annie Gist, and she got her doctorate from NYU. And Annie, when she came home one day to visit, she and a friend went to the Lindley Park pool. And of course, the pool at that time, it was still segregated. And so it caused a bit of an uproaring to where there were protests and death threats on Magnolia House and the whole bit. And so Mama Gist, I mean, I just imagine an apron on and her head on her hip like this, right? But she gets on the phone with the president of the NAACP, which is how that partnership, that relationship formed. And they then came together to do a call to action to desegregate the public schools here in Greensboro. And then that's from Annie going to the pool with a friend one day. So when you guys, I love the work that you're doing here in terms of the social impact and all of the education pieces, because that is not, those elements of history are not in the textbooks. They're not talked about. A lot of them are not known. So I love how we are opening up the floor for these conversations, whether they're comfortable or uncomfortable, good or bad, because it's things like that that people, you know, we just don't talk about. So with that, I'll let Buddy take us on home. And thank you guys so much for having me and having Evan.
Hold on. Sit. I don't know if I have any volume. Hold on. Okay, just make sure I had it muted here. Yep, it's ready. Okay.
It's a feeling. It's something that you can get into. It's something that you can feel the music, the vibes from it. I mean, it causes you to want to move. It stimulates you. I mean, me, it does that to me. The Magnolia House opened in 1949. And was, I mean, a success right away. The purpose was to make it into a motel when it was bought, so that the people coming through would have a place to stay. Blacks who were in music, who entertainers, athletes, from business, and educators, because they were the people that were traveling at that particular time. See, there was no place for blacks to stay in Greensboro. There was no place actually between Richmond and Atlanta. A decent place for blacks to stay. Okay, when the big bands came through, they either have to stay on the bus, or they have to go to private homes. And there was such a need for it. It was a tremendous success, you know, from the start. The bands only came, they only came occasionally, say, but we didn't see them like the people of North. You know, I mean, they saw them all the time. So naturally, when they came, I mean, there were big crowds. And it was very interesting. I got to know all of them because they stayed there at the Magnolia House. The Duke Ellington came here. His band, he did a concert at A&T. He didn't stay at the Magnolia House. In fact, he didn't stay in any segregated places. When he came, I mean, when he was touring the South, they had a special car the Southern Railroad would hook up to the train. And that's where Duke stayed, in that car. Now, the band members stayed at the motel. And the thing is, they went up to the Club Mombasa. And man, it was something that people had never even dreamed of. Duke Ellington's, his band, and Duke wasn't there. But his band up there in the Club Mombasa, that was really something. And playing with local talent. And they played up there until about 9 o'clock the next day until the train pulled off. People wanted to go. You know, I mean, the white people that wanted to come. You know, when they heard that band was up there. But they set up something where they segregated themselves. I mean, they missed out on it because they couldn't go in this black club. You go in the ground floor and then you go upstairs. And the club is on the second floor. So it's, they had bandstand, tables and chairs around around the bandstand. And the people sat, and then they had in front of the bandstand, they had a little area for dancing. The whole idea is that they give the best entertainment anywhere. Yeah, I made Historic Magnolia House, Conveyson, Bill Eckstaff, Ruth Brown. They did a concert at well, it would be the Coliseum, number one, the Coliseum then. It was the Armory. I think that's what it was. I think that's what they called the Armory. And then they would pack the place. You couldn't get near. If you didn't get there early, you wouldn't be able to get in. So they have a section set up for blacks and whites. But the way they partition the things off is just a little rope. So that people would, I mean, they sing right there together, you know. And so when the music got great, I mean, music got good, I mean, everybody got in a real mood. Well, blacks and whites start dancing. And Barcelona's sheriff, boy, he's trying to break it up, you know. He couldn't break it up. Y'all get back on that other side. He's talking to us. Y'all get back over there. And y'all stay over there on your side. Hey, listen. Boy, the people almost ran over his sheriff, getting down to the dance or getting behind at the dance. And that happened every time a big band came through here. Gladys Knight. This is Ike and Tina Turner. Now, sometimes Ike would want to fight Tina, you know. And my father would straighten him out. And my father would go get Tina, took her in the room with her, and then my father would get Ike would drink, you know. When he's all right until he drank. Then he want to fight Tina. And my dad would get on him. They were good friends. They worked the area a lot, and he stayed, you know, for periods of time. My mother was the ones who cooked for him. Louis Armstrong he liked country ham and syrup, you know, the molasses, black molasses. But he loved country ham and black molasses for him. And my mother would fix them for him. I met Martin Luther King in Greensboro. Now, I showed you Father's Sweet Shop, didn't I? But that's where I met him. So that's where the students used to hang out there at Father's Sweet Shop. That's one of the places that they're prominent. And on the other side of the street was called Boss Webster's. The girls from there would come to Father's sweet shop. And there was a fellow from Atlanta, and he called him Party Rock. And he was a classmate of Martin Luther King's in Atlanta. And he was out there on Market Street one day, and Martin Luther King was coming through driving to Boston, and he stopped and brought him in Flowers. And there, that's when we met him. When then he come back through here, sometimes he stayed with Rock. He was like the rest of us. He was interested in the pretty girls. That's what he was like. He liked the girls.
Natalie, Devin, thank you both so much. It's always great to see you. Devin, not so much. When I see Devin, it's usually 5:30 in the morning and we're doing horrible things outside, trying to be better people. Next week, Jean Workman will be with us, and she is with Every Baby Guilford. She's the executive director of Every Baby Guilford. She will be focusing on mortality rates and the disparity in the health system. And then Kay Harmon, not here. Keep your eyes open. There's opportunities to sign up to tutor our PEC students. We hope with everything with surges and whatnot, we're going to keep our fingers crossed and pray for healthy students. But there's an opportunity in the bulletins and the announcements to sign up and tutor a young mind. And then lastly, I'll take us out with a prayer. I thought about this and thought about my friendship with Natalie and Devin and hospitality. So this is my favorite blessing. I think about travelers getting ready to leave. So we'll go to God in prayer. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Amen. Amen. Have a great week.
We done?